The Traveling Photographer's Manifesto, a guide to connecting with people and place. Written by David Hobby. Narrated by Trevor O'Hare. Part 1. The Thinking Photographer. How we learn. Your first morning in Southeast Asia arrives after a restless night. Having just flown 27 hours across 12 time zones, your circadian rhythm is completely scrambled. Nonetheless, here you sit, ready for the first day of your adventure. From the wood-paneled dining room on the top floor of your hotel, you survey the Hanoi skyline over breakfast. The buffet offered traditional Western fare alongside some interesting East Asian options. You went with the familiar: an omelette, bacon, fruit, and coffee. You're here for the better part of the next 2 weeks. There will be plenty of time to work your way through the lineup. The omelette was made fresh and decent. The coffee, on the other hand, was among the best you've ever had. Although you'd never tried it, you vaguely remember Vietnamese coffee being a thing back home. You make a mental note to continue this research over the coming days. Your camera gear sits on the chair, tucked between you and the wall for safety. You brought 2 current model bodies, one with a wide zoom and the other a tele. In your bag are 2 more lenses, a small flash, and various accessories. All things considered, a pretty light pack. At 8:30 a.m., with a full belly and a freshly formatted SD card, it's time to head out with your cameras. You have no idea what your first outing holds in store. That's okay. You've grown to accept that luck is a part of the game. The last drop of coffee savored, you shoulder your gear and walk to the elevator for the ride down to the lobby. As the doors slide open, a man steps out. He's carrying a small, well-worn camera with a fixed, medium-wide lens. He is busily writing in a small notepad and looks up mid-scribble. Noticing your gear, he recognizes you as a fellow photographer. He smiles, nods, and heads past you toward his breakfast, already back to jotting down more notes. 2 photographers in the same hotel dining room on the same morning, but these 2 people are inhabiting different universes. One appears well-equipped, but is relatively inexperienced and dependent on luck. The other carries a single camera and lens, and the advantage of months of pre-trip research, plus decades of experience shooting on location. How will these photographers differ in their approach to photographing the same city? How do they select their gear? How will they choose their subjects? How do they find and meet the people who can unlock the city and its culture? We are going to explore these differences, because the measure of a photographer isn't about which camera they use or the maximum aperture of their lenses or the size of their camera bag. Much more so, the success or failure of any photographer will be decided in the space between their ears, because our brain is far and away our most important piece of photo equipment, and that is the gear we're going to upgrade. At different points in my career, I've been both of the photographers in that hotel dining room. In the early years, I was long on photo gear and short on experience. Now, 40 years later, I usually travel with a single body and 1 or 2 lenses, and lots of notebooks. In lieu of the extra photo gear, I carry the knowledge and experience gained over the course of shooting more than 10,000 daily assignments. In practical terms, that boils down to a fluid ability to solve problems. No matter what roadblock gets thrown my way, I know I'll quickly be able to find a workaround. Most of the time, I don't even think about it consciously. It's like water finding downhill. More often than not, these solutions have little to do with camera operation. Instead, experienced photographers work ahead to deflect bad luck, while simultaneously sowing and nurturing good luck. 35 years ago, my friend and fellow photographer Chris Usher introduced me to the concept of being a thinking photographer. At first, I was like, well, duh, as if this approach had been obvious to me all along. But it hadn't. And the more I considered it, the more the idea of being a thinking photographer grew on me. In the following decades, the mindset has become a guiding principle. On the most basic level, I constantly remind myself to think proactively. The gap between a great photographer and the average weekend duffer all comes down to the differences in how they solve problems. And I'm not just talking about the craft of making photos, because the real playing field is much larger than that. Just as with any form of expression, music or painting or creative writing, photography is both a language and a tool. Merely knowing how to communicate in that language isn't the ultimate goal. Knowing how to operate your camera is like the ante at a poker table. It's what gets you into the game, and nothing more. It's the rest of the game where all the fun happens. We're going to assume that you are already capable of making technically solid photos, meaning you know how to operate your camera, sharp focus, good exposure, decent composition, etc. Good for you. As a bonus, those skills will get honed along the way as we talk about the heart of the matter, examining photography through a much broader lens. Not to worry, if your camera skills aren't what they could be, we'll talk about a few things that you can do in order to communicate much more effectively. My hope is that you'll quickly find two things to be true. One, you'll be surprised at how much you can accomplish with only a modest gear set and photo skills. And two, you'll see that your photography can be the key that unlocks doors to all kinds of new experiences. Those new experiences can lead to even better photos. But first, you'll have to nudge yourself out of that camera as center of your universe mindset. In other words, to become a better photographer, you're going to have to stop thinking about photography so much. You'll need to spend more of your effort on the many non-photographic components of photography. To start out, let's look at an example of something you might learn about camera operation versus another, non-camera aspect of photography. Learning camera operation is mostly a sequential and predictable process. We shoot, then we look at the results. With that feedback in hand, we go back. We adjust. We try again. This kind of steady, incremental learning is how we inch forward. If we work at it hard enough and consistently enough, we'll experience the regular little epiphanies that allow us to learn to solve our problems in new ways. And suddenly they aren't problems anymore. Much of this learning curve is heavily weighted in our early years as a serious photographer. For me, that was in my late teens and early 20s. As a teenager, I worked as a photo stringer, newspaper speak for a regular freelancer, for the Leesburg Commercial in Leesburg, Florida. In 1984, at 19 years old, I had way more enthusiasm than experience. But enthusiasm counts for a lot, so I caught a stream of regular assignments from the commercial. Most of those early assignments were high school sports, because the paper had a strong community focus. And since the paper's lone staff photographer could not be in two places at once on a game night, that presented an ongoing opportunity for us stringers. In fall, that meant shooting high school football, and in spring, it meant basketball, which was fine with me because I was just out of high school myself. As a student, I had shot for my yearbook for class credit. But now I was shooting for the commercial for $20 an assignment. Laugh if you like, but I would have done it for free. At that point in my career, I was poorly equipped, well, at least for shooting basketball. My main body was an old Nikkormat FTN. It was a mechanical, manual camera that did not even accept a motor drive, which was fine because I couldn't have afforded one anyway. The fastest lens I owned was a Nikkor 50mm f2. For basketball, I would have preferred to use a longer lens, but in a dark gym, lens speed trumps focal length. And my 105 2.5 was 2/3 of a stop slower than my 50 f2. That was the difference between being able to shoot my Tri-X at ISO 3200 versus ISO 5000. The former you could get away with, the latter, not so much. Suffice to say that using manual focus and shooting just one frame at a time, I missed a lot of shots. Particularly frustrating were the slam dunks, and especially so those near-court dunks at the basket under which I was sitting. To be fair, it's pretty hard to manually follow focus a player running right at you on an open court breakaway en route to a dunk, especially when you're shooting wide open out of necessity. It takes skill, timing, and with only one shot in which to catch him, a decent amount of luck. Then one day, after missing yet another dunk, I had a thought. You don't have to maintain focus on the player as he charges in because you know where he's headed. He's going to the rim, every time. What a dumbass, I thought, mentally replaying all of my previously missed dunks. But after that, any time I saw a breakaway steal at midcourt, my first move was to the net, grab focus on the rim, and then lock my focusing hand. Now, swing back to acquire the out-of-focus player as he drives in. When he goes up for the dunk, he'll be right at the spot on which I'm already pre-focused, and now I can fully concentrate on timing my one shot. My batting average for dunk shots got a lot better from that day forward. With my new pre-focusing technique, if a dunk happened at my basket, I was almost always going to catch it. That epiphany offers a specific example of a way I became better at operating a camera. And over the years you spend as a photographer, these little moments of discovery move you forward on your path. You make mistakes, then you learn from your mistakes and get better. It's a slow process, but as you progress, things tend to speed up. Because not only are you learning from a broader base of knowledge, you're no longer having to learn everything firsthand. Whenever photographers get the opportunity to work together, or to do our post-work in shared spaces, we gain the opportunity to learn by cross-pollination. In the early days, that meant hanging out and chatting at the light table, or learning from each other while printing in the darkroom. As individual photographers, we all had our strengths and weaknesses. But if you and I hung out together enough, your strengths also become my strengths, and vice versa. Learning to be a better camera operator mostly happens within a fairly defined set of problems. But learning to be a more effective photographer is a far more random process and involves a much larger playing field. That's why when a group of photographers is drawn to a common place for something like breaking news or maybe a photo conference, inevitably they hang out somewhere most nights. I always treated those evenings as valuable chances to access other photographers' brains and to see how they have learned to solve some of the same problems that you face on a daily basis. This tradition of exchanging ideas is something that just happens on its own for working pros. It's tradition. We get together and share stories and beers because it is too valuable a thing to not do. Working photographers have that advantage over the typical photo enthusiast. Not only are they out shooting day in and day out, but they're also regularly cross-pollinating with other photographers who are out doing the same thing. Through those dual learning paths, you grow from first-hand experience while also becoming exposed to a steady stream of new ideas and strategies from others. And the more you get the opportunity to learn from other photographers, the more you grow to understand that many of the most important tidbits have little or nothing to do with photography. Learning to pre-focus on the rim when a breakaway happens is a camera operation thing. It's a photo hack to compensate for how hard it is to manually follow focus at close range. But the far more useful stuff has nothing to do with twiddling knobs or, these days, surfing menus. It's more about learning how other photographers think, and in particular, about the countless little non-photographic things they do to continually shave their odds. Hearing tales from other photographers is like watching a great movie, vicarious experiences that you get to test drive without cost or risk. And just as when you're sitting in the theater, a part of you is always asking yourself, what would I be doing in this situation? These kinds of narratives are why you are listening with rapt attention at 2 a.m., long past last call, as the guy across the table at the rooftop bar in Dubai is deep into a story. He's talking about how he talked his way into the office of the Ayatollah Khomeini just days after the overthrow of the government of Iran in 1979. The photographer in question was David Burnett, who was working in Tehran when the revolution erupted. Note: to view Burnett's work from the revolution, see his book 44 Days, Iran and the Remaking of the World. As a founding photographer for Contact Press Images, Dave covered the events on the ground, along with other journalists, as the revolution unfolded. But his specialty, in his 6 decades spent as a photographer, has been finding and making the storytelling images that others miss. His work in Tehran is a perfect example. Ayatollah Khomeini, having just installed himself as the new leader of Iran, set up his new office in a former school. He knew his supporters needed to see him during the transition. So the new regime would invite crowds of people into a playground below the Ayatollah's office, and he would emerge from his balcony to greet them. Guards would shuffle crowds in through one gate, Khomeini would walk onto the balcony, they'd go crazy with adulation, and then exit through the other end of the playground. Burnett dutifully covered what were essentially public relations events, documenting the revolution to the extent he was able. Because Iran's revolution was Islamic, the groups of admirers were separated by gender. This uniformity added to the graphic quality of the scene, allowing Burnett to make several strong pictures from these repetitive exercises. But while he had many versions of Khomeini on the balcony waving to his fans, what Burnett really needed were photos of the revolution's leader on a more personal scale. In particular, he wanted images of Khomeini working in his office. The more adoring crowd photos he and the other assembled photographers amassed, the more important those missing behind-the-scenes photos became. Unfortunately, the guy tasked to be the new press liaison was out of his depth. The economics professor pressed into service had no idea what he was supposed to do at the daily briefings, and no information to share. Soon enough, many of the other journalists stopped attending. I would have been frustrated and complaining. A hapless functionary stands between you and the photos you need to be making to properly cover a developing world story. But if I had done that, I would have pissed off the one person who could make something happen, just like a frustrated passenger berating a gate agent on an overbooked flight. Dave took a different tack. Each day, we would go outside and do new groups of pictures of all these people being brought in to see Khomeini, Burnett said. Then after a while, it was clear that not much else was going to happen, and we would leave. Burnett decided to nurture the narrow possibility of getting into Khomeini's office by working the clueless econ professor. I made a point of it every day in a very reasonable tone of voice to suggest that we had great pictures from out in the playground, Burnett said. And we could see Khomeini coming to the window, but it would be really great to be able to be inside. Each day, the professor would listen and then tell him to come back tomorrow. Burnett continued working his liaison, combining positive feedback of the job the guy was doing with a soft-spoken, reasonable ask. About the 3rd or 4th day, instead of saying, "Come back tomorrow," he said to, "Wait a moment," Burnett said. And he disappeared into the main building of the school and came back a few minutes later. And that's when he said, "Come with me, please." Burnett was escorted solo through the school, past many armed Khomeini supporters, until he arrived at a door. "Can you please take your shoes off?" the handler asked. I was still using my old 1971 Vietnam-era combat boots, jungle boots, and they take a long time to lace up or undo, Burnett said. I was out of those boots in about 15 seconds. And then he was in. Burnett sat down in a corner opposite Khomeini and tried to disappear, he said. Over the next 20 minutes in the office, Burnett made the photos that would soon be splashed across the pages of newspapers and magazines all around the world. He photographed the Ayatollah finishing his tea and working with his staff. Dave positioned himself so he could shoot Khomeini through a gap between the robes of another Ayatollah and other visitors. Once he had gotten into the office, the important skills were those of any photographer. Lens selection, composition, exposure, focus. Oh, and try to remain invisible. But had he not been able to get into that room, none of those skills would have mattered. So the deciding factor was in understanding how to play the rookie press handler. Burnett was respectful, soft-spoken, and supportive. He kept coming back after other journalists bailed on the unproductive press briefings, and he always finished the daily interaction with a little nudge for the liaison in furtherance of his real goal. Listening to Dave at the rooftop bar that night in Dubai, I was enthralled. Normally, in these circumstances, I like to play this little mental game of how would I have handled myself in this situation. I'd like to think I could have held my own, covering the revolution as it unfolded. And given the repetitive nature of the courtyard scenes, I'm pretty sure I would have eventually come away with strong images of the adoring crowds. But in every version of my imagined sequence of events, I would always be relegated to the role of supporting cast. I would not have captured the photos that Dave was able to make. Because I was 100% certain that I could not have gotten myself into the Ayatollah's office. But after hearing Dave's tale, I was already thinking about how I would handle myself differently going forward, in some future version of a similarly delicate situation. For photographers, it's these opportunities to learn from the experiences of other shooters that often prove to be the most valuable. And most of the time, the lessons have nothing to do with camera operation, but they have everything to do with photography. This kind of tangential knowledge is far more important to your success as a photographer than the camera operation stuff. Besides, there are plenty of places where you can learn about the exposure triangle or the rule of thirds. So other than a couple of important camera operation topics, we'll be skipping that part. Instead, I'll share the product of both first-hand experience and a lifetime of exchanging ideas with other photographers. Some of these ideas might seem obvious, even if only in retrospect. But there may also be ideas you'd never thought of. At least I hadn't before becoming exposed to them in a late-night conversation at a table full of colleagues. So pull up a chair, order a beer, and settle in. Grab your passport. Over the past 40 years, I have traveled with a camera as a photo enthusiast, a staff photojournalist, and for the past 15 years, as an instructor for various photo workshops. That path, from enthusiast to professional to instructor, offers insight into the way that different types of photographers think and learn. Enthusiasts enjoy complete freedom, with little to no responsibility beyond perhaps an obligation as the family documentarian. But they also lack the efficiency and focus of a working photojournalist, who must shoot under the constraints of an assignment for the benefit of their news outlet. Enthusiasts don't need to be as productive or efficient as professionals, but learning some photojournalist techniques can transform your experience, both as a photographer and as a traveler. Together, we'll bridge that gap between enthusiast and professional. So, after you've processed this manifesto, you'll think like a working photojournalist whenever you travel with your camera. The benefits go beyond just improving your photography. Learning to use your camera in a more focused and purposeful way will circle back to benefit the traveler as well. Over the course of this audiobook, we're going to take a virtual trip together, peeling back layers of the photojournalist's thought process and workflow. We'll discover some of the things you could be doing as a photographer, but probably aren't. Our destination is Hanoi, Vietnam. Why Hanoi? First, because it is a fabulous city with fantastic opportunities for a photographer. And second, because Hanoi is my home base as an instructor for Expeditions photo workshops. This book draws from those experiences. You might have zero interest in going to Hanoi, or that might change by the time you finish this book. While our virtual photo trip might at first seem very specific, you will find that the ideas presented here will translate to nearly any destination. Many will even be useful in your own hometown. We'll start long before you get on the plane, with pre-trip research. Then we'll learn how to identify the ideal subjects and how to find and make advance contact with the local people who can help once you arrive. After we land in Hanoi, you'll learn to decode the daily rhythm of the city and to best allocate the limited hours you'll have for shooting. Even with language as a barrier, we'll learn to approach and interact with people, a tough hurdle for many photographers. That skill is vital. We'll learn to leverage light as an emotional component of our photos, and more important, how to record the light in a way that is faithful to how you experience it at the scene. We will re-examine our approach to composition with an eye toward making photos with more staying power, because as photographers, our challenge is to render a three-dimensional world into two-dimensional photos. But as you'll soon see, that's only the beginning, because the real rewards come when you begin to think about composition as existing in 4 dimensions. It's a bottomless rabbit hole and a journey worth the effort. We'll try to lose our obsession with camera gear and perhaps even to get past the idea that it is all about the picture, because in the end, what matters most is the quality and depth of your experience as a traveler. The trick then is to learn to use your camera as the catalyst that creates a positive feedback loop between your travel and your photography. Sure, the camera is always at the ready to help you to record and cement your memories, but photography also can be a gateway to much more than that. Just like a photojournalist, you'll learn to think of your camera as a tool that can be used to open new doors. Over the past 50 years, I've had different relationships with both my camera and photography. But about 10 years ago, I arrived at a philosophy, a compass point, if you will, that has given me both clarity and stability. And it is this: I want to use my photography to enrich my life and my interpersonal experiences. My camera is a tool to help me to meet people and open doors to new experiences and friendships. That may sound suspiciously like an artist's statement. It's not. It's more like a tenet. It helps me to keep my focus, because without it, my default setting is to be too hung up on gear, circular learning, photo contests, or other needless distractions. This mindset helps me easily decide what I'm going to shoot, why, and how. It keeps me focused, which, as an easily distracted photographer, is in itself a battle won. Ironically, this framework also helps me to know when to leave the camera at home or in the hotel room, which means that I feel less pressure to always be shooting. As a result, I shoot fewer photos than I used to, but the photos I do shoot tend to have more meaning and purpose. When I was a photojournalist, the product of my work was designed to flow upstream to the benefit of my publication. Now, that photography engine is refocused to serve my own needs, to help me pinpoint my priorities, which helps me understand my process and my purpose. Take the time to articulate a compass point, whether you steal some ideas from my statement or come up with your own list. Fair warning, this won't be the last time we create a list. Not by a long shot. So let's get started on planning our photo trip to Hanoi together.